So this is part 2 of our Genesis 18 explained step by step. And if you haven't watched part 1, I definitely recommend you watch it. I'm going to put a video up here in the card so you can actually watch it right now. So before we continue going through this piece of text, let me know in the comment section below, what's one thing in this piece of text that literally just stands out to you off the page? Okay, let me know in the comment section below and let's get started. Alright, so one thing I started part 1 with was something really vital when I said you have to read the previous text, okay, for best context. Because when you read the previous text, okay, you get so much insights into what's actually happening. So let's continue now, finishing through Genesis 18. So let's get started. So it says, and the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. So what are we seeing here? Okay, now that they've eaten, it says the men rose up. Okay, what men are we talking about? Well, the chapter started by talking about how the Lord appeared to Abraham and he was sitting in his tent door. He lifted up his eyes. I highlighted how that phrase is really significant throughout the scriptures mainly. And then he sees these 3 men, okay? He sees 3 men walking towards him. And what does Abraham do? Abraham gets up and starts running to them. And he bows himself down and then he says, my Lord, okay? Which was basically him saying, God. The stipulation, I made the suggestion in the previous text that this was God and 2 angels. And some people do try and highlight and say this was an example of the Trinity manifesting itself. And I made a highlight and said, you know what, I don't believe that's the case here. I believe this is God and 2 angels. Why do I believe this? Well, what we're going to cover next is what's going to highlight most of this, okay? But what does it say next? It says the men rose up, okay? So all 3 of the men, you would assume, the men rose up. They've eaten their meal, now they're basically going on the way as Abraham suggested. And what does it say? It says, and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way, okay? So let's just say, for example, Sodom is this way. They get up and they look towards Sodom to go on their way. Why am I only pointing to 2 of them? Well, what does it say next? And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. Okay, so now it's all making itself clear in one way, shape or form. Okay, so God turns around and says, look, I'm specifically, this is what he says. Okay, he says, I will go and see. Okay, he says, I'm going to go and see if the cry from Sodom, okay, he's going to go and see if the cry from Sodom is actually as bad as it is. And if it is, then I'm basically going to wipe it out. If it's not, I'll know. And the reason it's really fitting, because what does it say? And it says, look, the men turned their faces towards Sodom, but it says, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. Okay. Now, just to kind of fast track quickly, when you finish this text and you get to 19, the first thing you see it say is, and there came 2... okay, which would line up with what we're seeing here. The 2 angels went off. God stayed with Abraham talking, and let's continue to see what happened. And Abraham drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Okay. And this highlights 2 specific things here. Okay. It highlights that Number one, Lot is there. This is the first thing it highlights. If you remember in previous text, it gets to a point where Abraham and Lot have too much herd, so they can't stick together. So what Abraham basically says is, look, you choose where you want to go and then go that direction, and then I'm going to go in the other direction. And it talks about how Lot lifted up his eyes, okay, that famous phrase, and it says he saw the plains of Sodom and he saw that it was good. So he went that direction. Abraham went in a different direction. So this is the first thing that's really important, okay? Abraham's saying, are you going to destroy the righteous with the wicked? The first thing that's vital is because Lot's there, okay? And some people try and paint Lot out to be some sinful person. Lot did make a mistake to a certain degree by going to live in Sodom, in that wicked place. But we see in the New Testament, I believe it's in Peter's epistle, where we get more context about Lot. And Peter's writing and basically talking about how Lot was a righteous man, basically entangled in the wickedness that was going on there, and how he was basically vexed. His spirit was vexed, basically, being in that scenario. What's the second thing it highlights here? By what Abraham actually says to God in that question, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Okay, he assumes that God doesn't consider this, and this is vital. Why would you say this is vital, Israel? I would say this is vital because this is the kind of theology, this is the kind of doctrine that a lot of naysayers have. This is the kind of doctrine that a lot of people that think God just goes around doing as he pleases, in the sense, well, I don't care about these people, or I don't care about those people, I'm just going to do what I want. The question Abraham asked God assumes that God hasn't factored in, oh, you know what? There's a righteous guy down there, Lot, or there might be other righteous people in that particular city. And Abraham says, peradventure there be 50 righteous within the city. Will thou also destroy and not spare the place for 50 righteous that therein? That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked, that be far from thee. Look what Abraham says here next. He says, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Okay. So he's already made his point. Are you going to destroy the righteous with the wicked? And this is basically, he basically says 5 times, okay? 5 times he basically says in one way or another, should the righteous get destroyed with the wicked? And he wraps up by saying, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Okay, so again, he's assuming that God hasn't factored this in. And the first thing he says is, he says, what if there's 50 righteous? Will you destroy the city still? Okay, and what Abraham is basically doing anyway, in a nutshell, is intercession. Okay, this is where, for those of you who don't know, where someone prays to God on behalf of another person. This is what Abraham's doing here, inadvertently. And the key thing here is again, this whole conversation is based on an assumption. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Okay, basically, and this anyway shows you the kind of relationship God had with Abraham. The fact he could ask these kind of questions, okay, because he's basically challenging God's character in a certain way, ultimately. And he basically goes on to say, what if there's 50 righteous in the city? Will you spare the city? So God says, I will spare. If I go to that place and we identify that there's 50 righteous in that city, then I won't destroy it. So what do we see? We see Abraham get all the way down to 10. From 50, okay, he says, what if there's only 10 righteous? And God says, if I go, I will spare. Now, this is really interesting for a number of reasons. Number one, This all started with an assumption by Abraham that God isn't factoring in the righteous amongst the wicked. Okay. And because of that, Abraham basically says 5 times, he basically says it in 5 different ways. Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Aren't you going to do what's right? And isn't it ironic, after doing that, okay, he now says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. He asks, what if there's this? What if there's this? What if there's this? What if there's this? Okay. Interesting enough, okay, 6 is commonly known as the number of man. God created man on the 6th day in Genesis, in the book of Revelation, 666, okay, etc. Not 6 is the number of man. And isn't it ironic that 6 times Abraham queried God? I remember one thing that was interesting about this is a time when I was reading this, and I was thinking to myself, why did the conversation stop at 10? Okay, why didn't Abraham just get all the way down to 1? And it's interesting because what does he say on the 6th occurrence? He says, Abraham says, I will speak this once. So that's what Abraham says. So after Abraham says this, he says, I'm going to speak once. Oh, let not the Lord be angry with me. I'm going to speak just once. And he says, what if there's 10 righteous? And God says, I'm going to spare him. And then that's when it says, and the Lord went his way. Abraham is the one that shut this conversation down. Okay. I'm pretty certain if he didn't say this, he probably would have been able to continue going down, 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 down. Okay. Until whenever he decided to stop. Okay. So that's one thing you highlight. What's another thing? Okay. So I mentioned this a couple of times. I'm overemphasizing this so you get this and see this context. Okay. He said 5 different times, isn't the Lord going to do right and not destroy the righteous with the wicked? What did God say every single time? Every single time he queried him about a number. If there's this many righteous people, if there's that many righteous people, he said, I will spare. Okay? Every single time, that's what God said. If I find 10 righteous in that city, I'm going to spare it. Now, this is the kind of thing that gets me thinking about so many different things, okay? I've already kind of highlighted already. Number 1, Abraham was one that shut the conversation down, okay? Number 2, in the flood, how many were found righteous or saved? 8 people, okay? 4 couples. Noah and his wife, Shem and his wife, Japheth and his wife, Ham and his wife, okay? Only 8 people in the whole world, okay? And I just think to myself, why didn't Abraham just say 1? What if there's 1 righteous? My nephew Lot, that's it. Okay, that's the funny thing. And what did I say earlier? To start chapter 19, it says, and there came 2 angels to Sodom. You notice that the storyline is continuing, okay? The 2 angels looked towards Sodom and went on their way, but Abraham stood yet with the Lord. Abraham had this whole conversation talking about, what about this? What about that? Etc. While these 2 angels go. The next chapter talks about how in the evening 2 angels come to Sodom, okay? That's why I believe that this was God and 2 particular angels. And what you're going to find is that ultimately Sodom and Gomorrah, for those of you who don't know, is ultimately destroyed, okay? So based on this conversation here, we know that there weren't even 10 righteous in Sodom, which isn't a surprise considering only 8 people survived the flood of Noah, okay? And when you think about this, we see that Lot and 2 daughters are the only people that survived, okay? So 3 people. And the crescendo with all of this is Abraham challenging God here is that the angels basically say to Lot in the next chapter, we need to get you out of the city because the city can't be taken out, destroyed, wiped out until you are out of the place, okay? So even though there wasn't the amount of righteous people, the storyline indicates to us that God already considered, okay? Some people consider that God just does things without considering what's right, etc. God is just and God is righteous, so he always considered these things even if before we try and challenge him like Abraham did. Okay, so God had a plan for Lot to get them out, to give them the opportunity to get out, one final opportunity, and Lot and some of his family members decided to take it. Others didn't, and that's obviously how the Lord ultimately wiped out Sodom and Gomorrah in the next chapter. But this is all based on what we've seen in Genesis 18. For more about Abraham, I'm going to recommend you watch this video right here, okay, which is another great story about Abraham, another contentious story about Abraham, which I think you should consider, and obviously subscribe to the channel. Thanks and take care.